Hi, it's Carl Brower, and I'm standing next to what appears to be a 1968 Ford Mustang GT Fastback. But really, it's so much more than that, and we're going to dig into the details and experience this car firsthand. First thing to remember is that this is not built by Ford. This car was built by a company called Revology Cars. And Revology Cars was started by a man named Tom Scarpello. I know Tom, I've known him for about 20 years because he used to work at Ford Motor Company when they were designing the 2005-2006 Ford GT. And if you know me and you know my history, you know that car holds a special place in my heart. But Tom eventually left Ford, he did some other things in the industry, and then he started Revology Cars out of Orlando, Florida. He really wanted to build an all-new type of Mustang. Tom didn't want to build a resto mod. He didn't want to take original platforms and make them better. And he didn't want to build replicas where he tries to exactly recreate the original Mustang. He wanted to produce original cars that looked like the original Mustang, but had all the modern driving capabilities and conveniences of today's cars. And he was able to get a license from Ford to start recreating these cars from scratch. That means this car has a chassis, body panels, and a floor pan that are created from raw metal. They've never been in a car form before. He's not going to junkyards and raiding cars that are there. He's building these cars as if they're brand new cars on an assembly line with 26 points, just like any other car company, and a very specific process. There's this kind of beauty in producing the same basic car over and over because it means that you can be very specific and come up with an assembly process that doesn't waver, and you master that art of producing that same basic car. However, while all of these cars use the same basic assembly process, there's a wide range of features and customization that you can do. Revology Cars has built over 250 of these Mustangs, and none of them are identical. Because as a buyer, as a customer, you can come in and choose from a wide range of specific features, whether it's the transmission being manual or automatic, the color, the interior quality, the features and options. Tom allows for a wide range of customization once you've committed to the basic Revology platform. Among the many specifications you can decide when you're getting a Revology is engine size and horsepower. This particular model has a 5-liter Coyote modern Ford V8 engine, and it can be hooked up to either a 10-speed automatic or, in the case of this, a 6-speed manual transmission. The kind of changes that Revology makes to these vehicles from the original Mustang are ones that help improve its performance, but they say they want to change things as little as possible. For instance, these wheels are 17-inch torque thrust wheels. And the reason they're 17-inch is because the original 14 and 15-inch wheels this car came with would not allow for modern brake system. And this vehicle does have a modern 4-wheel Wilwood disc brake setup. And you have to have at least 17-inch wheels if you're going to get that kind of meaty brake system underneath them. Here we are driving the Revology Mustang, and you can feel the modern technology underneath the skin of this vehicle. I gotta be honest, when I first got in it, I was driving it like a 1968 Mustang. I was leaving lots of space to slow down. I was not trying to navigate turns tightly. I was waiting for the rattles and tippiness as I went around corners. And it has taken me over 24 hours to basically reteach my American muscle car oriented brain to drive this not like an original American muscle car, but to drive this more like a 2025 Mustang, because it doesn't rattle, it doesn't tip, it's got really precise steering. You know, it is power rack and pinion steering in this vehicle, and it feels far more capable and modern than its exterior shape would suggest, which of course is the whole point. And you know, Tom talked about how Revology is a vertically integrated car builder, meaning they don't just get bodies from one location, engines from another location, interiors from another location, and put that all together. They do almost all of that stuff themselves. They do get the Coyote 5-liter engine from Ford, but they did a bunch of engineering to make sure that it uses a modern wiring harness that they also produce themselves, and it uses modern PCM connectors and all the things that modern engines use. The interior that we're sitting in, obviously the construction of the car, the bodywork, the paint, it's all being done within Revology Cars, and that's where they control the quality so much better. And they don't have to worry about components of the car not living up to the quality they have because they're doing all the car work themselves. Because this vehicle uses a unibody construction, sorry, I had to stop for a second, and that's kind of addictive. The sound and the torque this engine makes is not easy to not be constantly dipping into. Anyway, because this has a unibody construction, Revology started with that design like the original cars were, but they put in a lot of extra bracing and welding to stiffen the body. And that's what I'm talking about, and how it doesn't feel like a 1960s era car, even though it looks like one, because this is not an original frame or chassis that's been upgraded. It's a built from scratch chassis from the start that had additional bracing for rigidity and tighter tolerances. And by the way, when you look around the outside of this car, the body tolerances, you could almost do a Lexus commercial with this thing with the little ball bearings in between the body panels, because the exterior body panel tolerances are much tighter than you would expect, well, or that you'd ever see on an original 68 Mustang GT Fastback. The Mustang I'm driving right now has the standard 5-liter Gen 3 Coyote engine from Ford, and it's tuned to make 460 horsepower. But if you get one of the higher end models from Revology, like a GT 500, you get a 710 horsepower supercharged Coyote V8. And in either car, you can get this car's 6-speed manual, as mentioned before, or a 10-speed modern Ford automatic. Both are available, and I would think that I'd want the automatic. That was my original default. But the truth is, this manual works really well, and for the kind of visceral experience that you're going for in this car, it's probably the better idea. And here come some turns, so we're gonna rev match and enjoy that a little bit. Again, I am quickly learning to have more confidence in the car's capabilities because they're very high. Yeah, this car likes to go around corners. Certainly more than the original Mustang GT Fastback. Now, I'm not going to suggest that the V8 engine in this car is some kind of like over-refined, soulless, smooth, you know, EV-like experience. Not at all. There's a real pulse to this car and a real soul, but it doesn't at all feel overly harsh. And in stop and go traffic, when I was stuck in LA traffic when I first got in the car, that was fine. So the engine's got plenty of refinement for what this car is and what you're trying to do in it and what it's supposed to represent. It also uses a carbon fiber drive shaft, which is lightweight, and it manages to reduce some of the driveline harshness. It makes the application of power as the clutch engages a little smoother. And I'm still enjoying corners in this car whenever I can because they're really fun. One of the things Tom at Revology told me is that a lot of modern cars use the 9-inch Ford rear end. If you're putting a modern drivetrain into a vintage car like this one, they use that 9-inch Ford rear end. But those cars have a lot of whine in them. The rear end makes a lot of gear noise, and they didn't want that at Revology. They thought it was too disruptive to the experience of driving these cars. So Revology went through the trouble to engineer use of the 8.8-inch 31 spline heavy-duty rear end that Ford has, which is essentially as strong as the 9-inch, certainly capable of handling the kind of horsepower both engines put out, but is far quieter and more refined. And I think I have to agree with their choice because there's definitely noises this car makes, but none of them relate to gear whine coming from the rear end, which I just assume not be hearing. So I'm glad they made that choice and went through the engineering trouble to make that work. And by the way, that's another thing that's important to talk about is Tom mentioned what he dubbed the non-sexy engineering work that Revology has done. Things that nobody ever thinks about until they're driving a resto mod vintage car that someone's tried to make into a modern vehicle. and the door hinges have all this squeaking, rattling noise, and the doors themselves when you close them. And they went through and engineered updated versions of all of those body panel parts that have to move on a regular basis. The exterior door latch when you're releasing the door, the hinges that the door rides on, even polyurethane used with the windshield to seal the windshield better. None of these things were already done. None of them were ready to go. Revology had to make all these things work, and that took engineering time and energy. But they did it because they, again, like the rear end whine, they realized if you have a really fast car and even one that handles well and rides well, but it still makes all these creaking noises and there's all this rattle and the doors squeak when you open and close them, it's upsetting the vibe that he wants for these cars. Again, vintage looks, modern day experience and refinement. Okay, so that exhaust note you just heard comes from a Borla exhaust system, and it's been tuned specifically for this engine application. And what they wanted, again, was a nice burble at idle, which it's got, and a throaty note when you're aggressively on the throttle, which it's got, and a non-droning sound when you're going 60 or 70 and you put it in top gear. Okay, now I'm in the 6th gear and I'm going about 60 miles an hour with steady throttle, and I could go across the country like this and I'm not having to shout to be heard by the microphone because it's pretty refined and quiet. So that's the best of all worlds, right? All the noise and gone in 60 seconds experience that you can get when you're at lower speeds flooring it, and all the refinement and livability at high speeds when you're on your cross-country rally and you don't want to get to the end of each day and feel like you got a headache and you've got all this wear and tear on your nervous system because you've been listening to a big loud exhaust the whole day. Revology likes to point out that if you get one of the 710 horsepower versions of this car, you've essentially got the same power to weight ratio as a 488 Ferrari. And you're probably not going to pull exactly the same lap times as that car because it still does weigh more and you're still working with a starting point that's not quite as advanced, but it does feature advanced underpinnings like a 4-wheel disc brake system from Willwood with 13-inch rotors up front and 12.8-inch rear rotors. I mentioned the rack and pinion steering. It's also got a double wishbone suspension in this car. So another modern technology application to give what is a 50-plus-year-old vehicle a much more modern feel and confidence around corners. Speaking of modern technology, all the exterior lighting on these cars is LED. And it's cool how they don't just have the traditional lights you expect on this vehicle, but a few key upgrades like LED lights on the inside of the exterior door handles that helps you identify where they are at night, especially on this black car. They reflect off of the paint as you walk up to the car. It's a pretty cool effect. Even when you're not driving this car, you can feel, again, the modern technology. You go to close the trunk lid and there's this solid thunk without any after closing reverberation that you're going to get in all classic muscle cars. And it reflects the quality of the hinge work on all of the major body panels, also the quality of the gaskets that fill the space between body panels on something like the trunk to keep it from rattling. Where things really come together is the combination of the modern technology and engineering they've used for hinges and body panels that operate much smoother and have this solid thunk when you close them like the trunk lid, but also remote opening. Hold down the unlock button for a few seconds on the key fob and the trunk pops open. While you're going to get a certain amount of drivetrain noise, especially exhaust note in this vehicle, and that's probably a good thing, wind noise is surprisingly low in this car. I mean, these cars are still the same shape as they were originally, and that essentially means you're moving a brick through the air. But the wind noise is massively reduced compared to any original muscle car I've driven. And it's because they use polyurethane bonded glass throughout the vehicle. And again, that was some engineering work to make that work, but it pays off in a much quieter, more refined experience. More modern conveniences that you get to benefit from: a central 7-inch touchscreen, Pioneer touchscreen, that has features like reverse camera when you're backing up, and a wide range of connectivity, including Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, with a wireless or through the USB port. Both of those work. You also have an optional 720 watt, 8-channel focal audio system for, well, a powerful audio experience that probably matches the kind of drivetrain and overall drama that this car is capable of. If you're wondering how all these enhancements to what is ostensibly a 50-year-old car translate into performance, according to Car and Driver, when they tested one of these with, I think, the 710 horsepower engine, it did 0 to 60 in 3.7 seconds. It did the quarter mile in 11.7 seconds at 124 miles per hour. And it pulled a 0.88 G on the skid pad. So almost a full G of lateral acceleration this car is capable of. I don't think Lee Iacocca, when he first came up with the concept of the Mustang and said we needed a small, sporty car, ever imagined that any version of that original car would pull almost a G in the lateral skid pad test. It's interesting to see how they've integrated modern technology into these vintage Mustangs. Remember, the key is to keep the vehicle looking as original as possible while offering modern conveniences like power windows. But of course, they've also got original roll up and down window cranks on the door panel, but they don't actually roll. You just push them a slight amount to move the windows up and down. And you've got analog gauges apparently, but you actually have different displays that you can see and scroll through within these analog gauges. And there's ways to reset things. You can get tire pressure sensor information. It's really pretty amazing how first glance suggests vintage Mustang inside, but closer analysis reveals advanced technology. Very similar to really the vibe and the philosophy throughout the car. You do have a 7-inch Pioneer touchscreen here with wireless Apple CarPlay capabilities, and you do have plug-ins for USB and USB-C inside the console. You've got climate controls that look like original Mustang controls for things like fan speed and cool or warm temperature, but they look like the original Mustang controls and work very effectively and intuitively. But you get very cold air conditioning and full control over where the air is directed, just like a modern HVAC system. After a couple hundred miles in the Revology Mustang, it's clear the company has accomplished what they wanted, which was to create a premium, if not luxury experience in a classic looking car with a lot of modern features and modern performance as well. I'd like to think the company will continue to grow, and even better, it'd be fabulous if they expanded. Could we all see a line of maybe vintage Challengers or Cudas or Camaros with the same treatment? I don't know what they've got planned, but to me it seems like a wide open market. This car has worked and done quite well for them. I don't know why a few other models wouldn't do the same thing.